Good evening and welcome to the first of the spring 2021 BFA Capstone Reading Series. Tonight we have three writers. All three of these writers happen to have incredible names, rock star level names. We're talking here Lizzie Groth, Emmalyn York, and Val Mingus. Not only do they have rock star names, these writers are stars. And it all begins with Lizzie. Her poetry leaves nothing out. The only possible thing I can contribute by way of introduction to this very intense poet is to ask you to imagine Walt Whitman's brain and Sexton's brain, and those two brains boiling together somewhere, a sauna maybe, a volcano, definitely somewhere hot. Our second writer is Emmalyn York. She is a writer who gets into her truck and turns the key. Her own words there. Emmalyn's characters are not only people. Her characters are aforesaid truck. They are also horses and trees and fires that burn things out, specifically people. They are dogs and they are beefy arms and sticky teeth. And yes, her characters are also the dead, which does not preclude them from being alive. Wrapping up tonight, we have Val Mingus. Val Mingus is a water poet. Water is her thing. How water fills us, how water cheats us, how it loves us and leaves us drowning, far too dry. Val's poems fall into each other, as you will hear this evening. Not unlike water, and they fall into our ears and into our hearts and our nightmares, where beauty is possible and where beauty is. Please welcome these wonderful writers. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Prout Chapel. So great to be here with you guys here in Prout Chapel. Clearly, this is not how I wanted my senior BFA thesis Prout reading to go. This is clearly not how I expected my senior BFA thesis Prout reading to go, but did any of us really expect anything that's happened in the past year? No, obviously not. But then I realized that while Prout has this very, special, kind of magically musty atmosphere, I don't know, like you feel like you're stumbling upon something that's been lying dormant for thousands of years, and then suddenly you breathe to life, new creative works inside its walls. And it's that very ephemeral moment that just, you read and then it's over, and then some people remember it, some people don't. But this is special too, because it's not going anywhere. It's staying on video forever. Even if it doesn't stay up on YouTube forever, even if Dr. Coates wants to take it down, make room for a different video, it's gonna be here for a while. Which is why I changed the poems I was planning on reading today. I was going to read a couple other poems, but I just feel like they're not the ones that I want the world to remember me with. Like, they're great poems, of course, and they're going in my thesis, not to toot my own horn. Like, I worked very hard on them and I'm proud of them, and they're gonna go in my thesis forever. But the only person who's gonna see that are my thesis advisors, and really me, probably, who's ever gonna look at it again, if I even choose to look at it again. So I wanted the words that I say tonight to be the ones that I want people to hear the most. But another great thing about doing this online is that a lot more people can come and see my reading that wouldn't have normally been able to due to, you know, time constraints or living in another country. Shout out to my friends across the sea. I think that this is working out the way it's supposed to. So without further ado, pardon my large self-introduction. I just wanted to call to mind that this is different, but it's still good. That being said, first poem I'm going to read is called "Two Scientific Things Make Sense to Me, But Not Really, for my poet friends on a still warm earth." Parallax is a displacement in an object's position when viewed along two different lines of sight. Nothing has ever made any sense to me a single day in my life. I just nod and smile. The sun was supposed to burn out before I knew better. Sometimes I wonder which version of me people like best, but I think I'm better off not knowing. Before I knew about parallax, I wondered why the moon moved when I alternated closing my eyes. This is different than whatever makes the moon follow you home in the car. The name Lizzie followed me to high school, college, my internship in Orlando, and now my writing circle. Every time I want to get rid of it, I decide not to. Every time I want to order something new at Applebee's, I continue to get boneless buffalo wings. I still wonder why the world looks bluer and darker in my right eye and redder and brighter in my left eye. 3D glasses. Synesthesia is the reason I think that Christmas Eve falls on the 25th because 5 is green, and that Christmas Day is the 26th because 6 is red. And I should know that the yellow 24th is the star that tops the 25th green tree, but I'm an adult and I have a calendar to remind me. Mantis shrimp have 16 color receptors. I have 3. I thought the sun was going to burn out. Instead, I went from reading 2 books a day to reading 2 books a year, if I'm lucky. I'm still confused about whether or not COVID-19 lives on surfaces. I want to go on a plane. Nothing has ever made any sense to me. That is to say, I did not think I was going to burn out. What exists in the space between both lines of sight when both eyes are open or closed? It would be artsy to say that's a space for anything, for poetry, for oxygen, for gnats, for God, for potential, but I don't want to be artsy. I think it's just air, but I have no way of proving that. I won't think too hard about it. The sun is not going to burn out. We will not have 7 minutes to watch the darkness and slowly or quickly freeze to death. I'm thinking about the space between each line of sight again. I'm thinking about how our brains process our faces invertedly. I'm thinking about if that means I'm cute or ugly, and which side of my friend's nose his nose ring is on, and which side of my nose ring is on, and why one eye can see it at all times. The sun is actually going to expand and swallow the earth in a fiery heat death. Incineration. I write poetry because I was bullied for writing songs. They were right, but it still kind of hurts. I used to write stories to make people smile. Now I write them because I am crying. I write poetry because I'm screaming. Every poem written tonight will be swallowed by the sun, and I want to read every one of them. My nose is why parallax makes sense when nothing has ever made sense. I hoped the sun was going to burn out. I wanted human history to matter. I imagined that someday extraterrestrial life forms would come to the Earth Museum on a field trip and examine my bone fragments, exclaiming, that one has a story. That is, if I would even have bone fragments. Would the cold preserve my body? Would I be a monument to myself, eternally resigned to my fate, sitting in a once warm, comfortable spot, probably reading, or clinging to a pen, desperately scribbling last words that are more than likely left unfinished? Maybe the little alien 5th graders are given an assignment: finish Earthling number 121219998's poem, and that is how I accidentally live. I knit a scarf way too long on accident. They say potato chips were invented on accident. The Big Bang is perhaps the greatest accident, and that I was able to find my way to poetry. Because of parallax, you cannot look someone in both eyes with both eyes. The windows to the soul have Venetian blinds. I never learned how to close Venetian blinds without yanking on the string. Nothing has ever made any sense to me. I'm a clusterfuck. I like strong words that mean something. Joe March, 2019. I hope my words don't sound like the chaos I feel. I genuinely hope they mean something to you the way yours mean everything to me. I talk about myself too much. Is that poetry? The earth is not going to be dark and dead, with proof for any aliens with wanderlust to vacation to. Earth is the Library of Alexandria, with no backup copies of our history in a distant, not on fire library on Pluto, the planet that is still a planet because I want it to be. But I'm still here, sharing my words, both lines of sight looking straight at you, because your words matter to me now and they make sense, and I'm ready to listen. That was a poem that was dedicated to all my other friends who are poets. Woo! This next poem, a little different vibe. This is The Chairs. It is an ekphrastic poem, meaning it is a poem that is written after a work of art, but this one's actually written after two paintings by Van Gogh called The Chair and Gauguin's Chair. The Chairs. Two chairs avoiding eye contact, one belonging to he who captured the simple beauty of the night sky, the other to the man who gazed upon a busy street and saw art, making a point that will be permanently misunderstood because I permanently choose to misunderstand it. I choose to see a self-constructed narrative, friends to enemies to old friends, which isn't too far from the truth. I see one man settling into a simple chair for maybe the last time, tired from years of feuding, accepting that the other will always be part of his life, like that one creaky stair you never fix, like that weird rash that shows up once a year but goes away with some Benadryl and a nap, like that book you keep meaning to read but think you understand well enough for conversation. And he smokes his pipe and looks at a letter from that person briefly before going to bed under thin sheets in a plain room because he thinks he deserves a creaky stair and a rash and is just too tired to read. But the other chair, that chair holds that book and its sequel read over and over before being recommended over and over in a series of letters over a series of years, written in the light of a candle that illuminates only the most beautiful emptiness. An ornate chair in a gaudy room belonging to someone who knew their worth and accepted that the other will always be part of his life. Like a homeless busker who takes permanent residence on one corner but has a new song every day. Like finding $1 in your winter coat and leaving it there to be surprised again next year. Like reading that book but catching a new line every time. And I see art in the stars and streets too, but hanging chairs to face each other and forcing greatness to look greatness in the eye holds the most satisfaction in quiet beauty. This next poem is called Sensory Overload. It is a sestina, which is a form poem that is really hard, and I like to write them to torture myself. Woo! Sensory Overload. Laying among the dandelion puffs in the dying glow as the last rays drift, a terminal warm velveteen haze washes over my skin before night's breeze sets branches tapping, and nature's chilly breath hits my bare limbs and makes me shudder. 3 times I pulled the door shut, and 3 times more I closed the shutter in the 6:30 NBC News' glow. My laugh is no more than a breath as true crime and heartwarming rescues drift into theories of political wiretapping, and new miracle diets become cancerous Cheetos in this haze. I turn off the TV for the half-hearted Tinder haze and pick up lines to make anyone shudder, and I exit and delete before they try tapping into secrets illuminated by my phone's glow. My eyes close and I drift off to sleep and slow my breath until I begin to think about the breadth of the Milky Way's haze and continental drift, and whether I have OCD as a repetitive door shutter, and what makes fireflies glow when I hear a sound alongside the tapping. I hear the leaky sinks tap ping. I am now aware of my own breath, and the blinding center of the streetlight's glow. Seconds could be hours in this haze. I hate the monotonous branches against the shutter. Out of my bed, I drift. Into the kitchen, I drift, and I open the fridge. Cool air stale to my nose, and start tapping into the Jameson and its light, because I am not an immediate shutter of refrigerator doors. One calm inward and outward breath snaps me out of that anxious haze. Breath mutes tapping for a haze to drift through the shutter, the moon's glow. Next poem is called Ode to the Elements, Long-Term Promises, and Poetic Symbiosis. To the sea, lapel de la mer beckoning me with promise of freedom, of seeing those from whom she keeps me apart, to the true final frontier, the only thing left to explore that is capable of being explored until we hit the molten core, to a gentle rain that visits each of us in turn, the same cyclical rain that was once dinosaur spit and Caesar's piss in the first cup of coffee, to streams still and rushing, knowing its course while the individual drops make their choice, to the tide and the moon who periodically straightens her back, to water. Thank you for the hope that on a steady course I might someday make good on the promises I made under the moonlight, to the earth who has never been kind to me, to stretches of land with arbitrary borders. Is it not enough to numb my toes in cold dirt and know that somewhere on this same cracked but connected stretch of land, you are doing the same? To stone, to burial of false hope, to natural rock and unnatural ruins. Until I walk the grass of your lawn, close the space between us, sip tea with herbs from the ground, weave a crown of flowers from the ground, maybe even smoke something from the ground, until I can touch life with you, I will thank only the sands for their instability, their constant motion, their numbing and scorching, their crumbling creations that I knew could crumble, their lack of unkeepable promises. To the airwaves through which your words pass, an impossible breeze which permits me access to your face, and for that I am thankful. Thankful that I have a breath to hold when I do not want to miss a moment of your majesty. To the oxygen that keeps my full heart beating, to dragon wings beating, to aerodynamic wings flying freely beyond those arbitrary borders, to air, to the element that unifies the other three, to the element that promises unity to you and me, if only someday we get that goddamn vaccine, to the stars I was born under, to the sun that passes over each of us day by day for you and night for me, to the burning horizon we can never reach, to the heat of the earth's molten core, to phoenixes and dragons, to destruction and rebirth, flames that light the cancer sticks of your destruction and the wicks that crumble beneath the steady, quiet flames by which I write, to the electricity that keeps my heart beating, to the electricity that I hired to connect you and me, to the electricity that keeps my heart beating, to the electricity that I did not want to mention, but I needed to grab a charger to continue this poem. I thank fire last, because our sparks are the promise we hold to each other, that someday, even years away, we will have a reason. We will still have a reason to look up at the same sky and recollect our art and remember the beauty of us. I consider my poetry to be a combination of therapy and stand-up comedy. So with that in mind, this next poem is called Funerals Should Have a Guest List. I've been to a funeral maybe 8 or 9 times, and I really only liked one of them, but every single one made me so fucking angry. At my great-grandpa's funeral, I was allowed to be sad. My mom's friends were not. They never met him. Why were they allowed to cry when I had to sit numb, staring at a book without reading it? Who gave them the right to grieve on behalf of their friend while the dead man's children took pictures of his body that they'll never want to look at? Funerals are fucking weird. At my elementary school computer teacher's funeral, her family and friends were allowed to be sad. I was not. Why were parents of her former students allowed to cry, as though this woman had had any impact on their life besides teaching their kids how to use PowerPoint? Sure, death can be sad sometimes, and cancer is sad all the time, and maybe the parents who were not her friends had other people dead from cancer on their minds, but they should not have cried. When my mother dies, only my sister and I are allowed to cry, which is why I would like to propose a 3-phase funeral wake process. Invitation only, guest list curated by the dying, living, whatever. No dress code because the sea of dressy black just looks like the worst award show crowd ever. Phase 1, casual acquaintances. These are the co-workers, former students, Facebook friends, and high school classmates, often the same thing. People who can say sorry, a practice I still don't understand, but we decided it's okay in group therapy. Comment on how your smile could light up any room, get on their knees for a quick prayer that they might believe, and dip, respectfully. They can frown or do the white person funeral smile, but not cry. Phase 2, extended family, fake friends, blood relatives. They might not show up when you need them, but they'll show up when you're gone. These people might be allowed one performative tear, but they really just want buried family secrets and your gold star recipes. Phase 3, real family, chosen family. These are the only people licensed to cry. These are the ones who have to show up. Why do I hold all of this anger toward people who cry at funerals for people who they did not love? I'm 22. I wrote my guest list, but I think I will arrive at my own funeral angry because the wrong people are there and the wrong people are crying. So once again, I would like to thank you all for watching my reading. I really appreciate it. It's been an honor to read and work alongside of Val and Emmalyn. They've really supported me over the past 4 years here at BG, and I hope that I've provided the same amount of support for each of them. So without further ado, with a poem titled after a lyric from my hero, Queen Elsa of Arendelle, here is Unpacking the Metaphors, I'm Dying to Meet Me. I am a mouse because someone told me I was. I whisper below the yells of the greatness that came before me. I am stealthy, I am small, and I like cheese, even though I shouldn't. I was once told that if I'm a mouse, that I'm a mouse on top of a megaphone stacked on top of 4 megaphones, and that has always made more sense to me. I'm loud. I am the horizon, something to sail toward but never quite reach. I overshare, you see the sinking sun, but if I still don't know me, then how can you possibly claim to? Only the horizon, I keep my distance. I watch the journey, I watch the ships, I watch things happen to me. The sinking sun, I am the light of dying summers, fireflies, tiki torches, the glow of a porch light, the sunset over a carnival. I am whimsy, I am a stuck adventure, childlike optimism, but knowing that every summer will end. Every smile will fade, every Polaroid will fade, every memory will fade, because I'm naturally predisposed to early dementia. And while I fear that I will forget the people and the words that I love, I take comfort in knowing that I will be remembered. A smile, a glow, a little bit of brightness if you want it, when you need it, I will light up for you. I am a euphonious cacophony, every 5th note off key, out of tune, a little flat, a little sharp, a disaster who has everything under control. A deadline with all the time in the world, dehydrated and always carrying a water bottle, uninspired with a pen in hand, ink-stained hands that smell like poetry, but I never developed a proper sense of smell. I love and have been loved. Neither have been quite right, and perhaps they never will be, a key that broke off in the door. I am myself, though not composed entirely of me. My blindest love's laugh in my mouth, the raised eyebrow of a boy who didn't know how to care, the arrogance of another just like him, and almost never the gentle motivation of my most patient friends. Maybe there's nothing left of me in me. Who am I beyond the standards by which I measure my success? Maybe I'm more of me than I've ever been because I've lived and lived to tell the tale. And at last, I am the orange haze. The ever-present orange haze meandering its way through every poem, dampening each page, melting the ink, running words together into a lack of thought, a cloud of everything. An orange haze in every breath, weighing on my lungs. I cough so hard that I see someone's God. An orange haze that I do not allow to dissipate. An endless stretch. It shrouds me. It follows me. It isn't as big of a deal as I make it out to be. It's fine. I'm fine. I'll be fine. I am that orange haze, and I'm better for it. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, my name is Emmalyn York, and breaking up our two poetry readings tonight, I'm going to be reading my fiction piece taken from my thesis, and it's called The House of David. Enjoy. The House of David. I dragged my uncle's body across the ground. My slight frame offered no help, forcing me to throw my entire weight into the job. The dead flesh scraped on the gravel, and I was grateful for the cover of the night sky. My truck sat parked in the driveway, moonlight playing games with the chrome trim. My hand felt around the middle of the tailgate until the handle found my palm like a magnet. I eased the heavy metal down, a familiar grounding action in unfamiliar circumstances. Behind me, the body lay face first into the stone. I thought about my high school gym teacher as I squatted to lift the bloated mass, always barking at us to lift with our legs. I heaved the body into the bed, pushing aside scraps of mildewed hay and old rotting wood. The crickets sounded, offering a much smoother reply than that of Coach Juergens. I crept around to the passenger side door. Again, I felt for the polished chrome handle, careful to keep the door's mechanics as quiet as possible. It felt a little funny to stay so quiet when we had no neighbors closer than a mile down the road, but silence always seemed most fitting in the presence of death. The tarp lay folded underneath the bench seat next to an aged can of lime I had pillaged from the barn a few days prior. I reached for both items and closed the door softly enough that the interior light stayed on, a dull yellow glow inside the cab. Before I wrapped up the remains in the blue tarp, I sprinkled copious amounts of lime on the body to mask the inevitable stench of dead flesh. Uncle Randy lay on his back in the bed, features twisted and marred beneath the white powder. Lime fell into his still-open, dead eyes. I worried about the lime marinating on the old scratched paint of my truck's bed, as if my vehicle wasn't already beat up enough. I guess this was a sacrifice I was willing to make. I knew that no one around here would think twice about something in the bed of a truck. Folks don't blink an eye at another man in farm country unless they're forced to. Thank God for that. I gingerly placed the tarp over the white speckled carcass. My Uncle Randy's limbs looked wrong, his flabby body even less attractive in death. I used last year's forgotten firewood to anchor the tarp down. Wood sank into the fleshier parts of my uncle's sagging skin, holding the tarp firmly in place. Easy. Too easy. I sat on the tailgate next to my dead uncle. Last night, my mother threw my cousin's body under the frame of our house. The old farmhouse guarded an ancient swamp, still thriving beneath the crumbling brick of our home. The pit below was rife with sludge and quicksand. Immediately, my cousin's body was swallowed up and forgotten, which is exactly what my mother and I wanted. When I was a kid, our barn cat slunk under there, got lost or trapped, and then died. From a young age, my nose was trained to detect dead animal stink. Maybe it worked its way into my brain somehow after all those years. My mother had taken the easy way out with my cousin's body. Merely dumping Uncle Randy somewhere was too easy, too simple, too predictable. As I watched my cousin sink into the pit, a can of Pepsi in my right hand, I knew I was going to dispose of Uncle Randy differently. Like choosing the right song to listen to when you're driving through a car wash, I had to choose the right place for my uncle's final resting place. I thought about my cousin under the house, swimming and circling, being sliced open by debris. I stole a glance at the shape beneath the blue tarp, glowing in the modest moonlight. Tomorrow, I swore to find a resting place for my uncle. Unfortunately, nothing is that simple. For the next week, I drove around aimlessly searching for a suitable place to dump my uncle. I didn't anticipate this part being the hardest. I held my breath when I had to stop at my town's gas station to fuel up, hoping I didn't see anyone I knew. I wondered if other people were holding their breaths too, but for a different reason. Uncle Randy was ripe. The summer sun was not kind to rotting flesh held captive under a tarp, roasting between the thin hot plastic and the hotter metal of my pickup truck's bed. Soon it would be too much, and I would risk being caught. Every day that summer, I drove somewhere new, exploring the predictable Midwest as best I could. Farm fields blurred into sturdy farmhouses. Corn bled into soybeans, and waving golden wheat stems caught me off guard with their sweet color. I learned that small-town post offices all look the same, and every downtown has no more than 3 failing restaurants and no less than 5 empty storefronts. Quickly, I learned the ghost towns that raised me had nothing to offer. I could not find somewhere for the body. It had to be perfect, and I needed to stay under the radar, nearly impossible in small towns where everyone knows everyone. My mom told me that for most people, church wasn't even about God or finding yourself. It was a weekly social event masked by its religious necessity. The church ladies kept tabs on their congregation, made new friends, and gossiped about old friends for sport. My uncle had believed in God, which I always found funny because I did not. It seemed silly to speak to something you couldn't see, couldn't touch, couldn't feel, and yet for the first time in my life, I was facing a crisis worth praying about. My lackluster prayers were answered when I was least expecting it. It was a sunny July morning, 4 days after the 4th of July. My uncle had been in the bed of my truck for 3 weeks. At the end of the first week, I bought 3 more cans of lime, with stashed away birthday money, and coated the body in its entirety. At this point, my uncle stank to high hell. There's manure smells, there's burnt flesh smells, and then there's the incomprehensible stench of rotting flesh. You can't mask it, never entirely, but I'd be damned if I didn't try. I was shocked to discover that the lime had eaten through his clothes and much of his skin, leaving a grotesque, dried-out mess inside the tarp. By the end of the 3rd week, he had decomposed and been eaten away thoroughly enough that I transferred his body into a thick plastic bag. Easier transportation and less ominous than a literal body outline. Less smell, but I resorted to fueling up my truck with the big red gas can we kept in the barn, always filled for the tractor. No more panic at the 2-pump gas station in town. No more snooty, wandering eyes of the farmers' wives. That July morning, I decided to take myself out to breakfast. My mom was working her early shift at the diner on Route 6, and I thought I would pay her a visit. I took a back road for the hell of it, cranked down the old truck's windows, and slid my favorite cassette into the tape deck. The previous summer, I stole the tape from a mouse-eaten cardboard box full of my mom's old things. The tape was fucked up from my mom rewinding it over and over to play her favorite Bangles songs. But I skipped those songs anyway, so it played just fine for me. I was flying over a hill, engine rattling louder than the blaring guitar, when I noticed the church sitting at the end of the gravel road. It looked residential, like it once was a house and then morphed into something completely different. A rusting playground sat abandoned behind the building, weeds overtaking insufficient mulch. I veered left and steered my truck into a parking spot at the very end of the unpaved lot. Too many cars were around and I wasn't taking chances. Who would even want to worship in a place like this? The sign next to the road read House of David in peeling red letters slathered onto faded white plywood. Long dead flowers sat trapped in fractured pots. Decay was normalized here, even in the height of a green summer. My shirt stuck to the bench seat as I tumbled out of my truck. Murmurs from inside the church drew me closer. It sounded like they were speaking in tongues. The rhythmic drone of human voices melted into one eerie vibration while I walked over to the building, looking back at my truck parked behind me. This was my first public appearance with Randy in a week or so, as his smell was enough to knock anyone on their ass if they weren't expecting it. I wiped sweat out of my eyes and peeked through the glass doors on the side of the church. Although the building had been renovated and transformed, the place was just a church. I shielded my face from the sun's reflection as I strained for a clearer view through the smudged glass doors. Less than 20 people sat in metal folding chairs, lined up like pews, facing a looming cross that dwarfed the small altar at the front of the room. It was off-putting for me to see a church lacking the stained glass windows I so often associated with worship. A burly man with graying hair led the service, waving his arms wildly as the audience mumbled and hummed in response. Plain-looking women sat with their legs crossed, their long dresses hiding their ankles. Bibles were clutched tightly to chests with the same enthusiasm as Uncle Randy's fingers wrapped around the neck of a cold Miller Lite. I leaned away from the glass and checked my watch. Just after 11. I noticed movement inside the building and squinted my eyes together to see inside again. The man leading the sermon strode towards the shadow I was casting onto the threadbare carpet within. The congregation followed the pastor, leaving their Bibles sitting on the rusty folding chairs. I cursed my curiosity and debated running back to the safety of my truck, but I was too late. The big man had reached the doors and was opening one up for me. The congregation welcomed me into their place of worship with no questions asked, despite my lie about a burning desire to find God. They liked that. The pastor introduced himself as Steve. He had a friendly smile, but dead eyes that matched the exhaustion of his sweaty polo. The House of David welcomes anyone. Woman, man, child, we are all sinners in the eyes of a flawless God. It would be my pleasure to give you a quick tour of our building if you're interested. We don't got air conditioning, haven't had it for years, so if that's something that's going to bother you, we can scrounge up a bottle of water. Several women rushed away immediately, and I assumed they were off to grab water just in case. Sweat dripped between my eyebrows. I analyzed the sweat marks on Steve's shirt as he clambered back up to the altar. The room with the folding chairs was the main feature, and clearly Steve was proud. He ran his hands over the altar's cheap stained wood and stared into my eyes. "Are you a man of God?" he asked, his voice warm but faint, flickering like a candle. "I think I could be." I lied again. "Everyone around here thinks they know something about God even if they don't. You gotta open yourself up from the inside before you can feel Him." Steve waved to 3 women in long skirts as they left the building. I was grateful I had parked my truck at the very end of the lot in case anyone got any funny ideas. Certainly they could still smell Randy's carcass, but I hoped they would assume it was a lingering roadkill scent. "Truth is," Steve boomed, snapping me out of my thoughts, "God's inside of you right now." He jabbed a thick finger into my chest. "He's here." Steve was sending me mixed signals. I began to wonder what he knew about God at all. "Why don't I show you the rest of the place, yeah? See what you think of it. Not often we get young folks in here." I nodded and followed the man. A small hallway connected the gathering space to a maze of various rooms. I was on edge in the church, but I still felt safe with Steve. Sometimes it is calming being in the presence of someone who feels so intertwined with their imagined God. On the left is the kitchen. Needs some work, but it's there. Steve eyed me briefly as I trailed behind him, watching sweat pool in the fatty folds of his neck. 2 bottles of water slick with condensation sat on a crummy counter. The sink was moldy and housed used Tupperware. Dirt had always been a friend of mine, but the thick grime built up on the tile was repulsive. "Maybe if we get more of you young people, we can clean this place up a bit. How about that?" Steve coughed and stared me down. "You don't say much, son. That's all right." I panicked and nodded to acknowledge his acceptance. Steve turned and resumed the tour, pointing out storage and a pathetic office space. 1 room remained at the end of the hall, and his pace quickened as we approached. Steve's dirty tennis shoes thudded on the carpet. "This room is, well, it's special. It's down this way because this hallway's the darkest. We don't want no natural lighting getting in here. Only room in the place with one of them air conditioning units, so you better close that door behind you once you go in. You ready?" Yeah. My spit was salty with sweat, and I was ready to embrace the cold air. I assumed it was an office or something. Why else would it have air conditioning? "Go on in." Steve swung the door open and gestured that I enter first. There are horses underneath us, so if you guys hear that, I'm sorry. They could be kind of loud. Anyway, I slid past Steve's meaty arm and into the dark cold of the room. Candles were stacked on the floor, placed in holders on the walls, and illuminating countless picture frames. It was a mess. An unused fireplace occupied a significant portion of one wall, its mantel adorned with wooden boxes, picture frames, and more candles. "What is this?" I spoke to Steve without being spoken to for the first time. "House of David's a little different. We don't like burying our dead. Too impersonal. You love a girl so much you could burst at the seams, and when she dies, you're just going to throw her in the dirt? In the ground?" Steve shook his head, thick eyebrows furrowing. "No, sir, I don't know." I ran my hands through my damp hair. "No, we don't believe in that. We got a fair amount of relatives housed right in this room. Some of them cremated, some of them just here in boxes. If we keep it cold enough, the smell don't bother us none." He was right about the smell. The only thing tickling my nose was the church's black mold problem. "Who can be kept here?" I glanced at a picture frame next to my left foot. An old man with wire-rimmed glasses stared directly at the camera, leaning against the same sign I had seen out front. He held a paintbrush in his right hand and beamed, proud of the bright, clear lettering. The picture frame was propped against a wooden box that read, Eugene Waters, House of David's founding father, in gold letters. The candles, the incense, the rituals. Was this a cult? This could be the final resting place of any of God's children, I guess. It's mostly just family of the congregation, though. Sometimes it's hard for the deceased other family to sign over remains to us, so there aren't as many tributes as there could be. But it's peaceful, ain't it? Respectful. God is here, and I can feel it. Steve closed his eyes, and I assumed he was praying. Steve? My voice cracked, an obvious weakness in an honest room. Yep. His eyes bore into my own, and I remembered how dull they were. My uncle died a few weeks ago. We were real close. I lied to the pastor's face for the third time that morning. In reality, Uncle Randy had beat the shit out of my mom for years. Before my dad died, he knew when Randy was in a bad mood and would ban him from entering the house. Some nights, my father would sit on the front porch with his shotgun just to ward off his own brother's bad temper. After Dad died, Randy became unhinged. There was no one to protect us anymore. When he hit my mom, my cousin watched in silence. Participated sometimes, but mostly just watched. About 3 weeks ago, my mom and I had had enough. Uncle Randy found my father's shotgun. In a drunken stupor, he aimed it at my mother's head. I was grateful to hear the empty click of a trigger without bullets to command. I guess Dad had never kept it loaded. I was able to grab the metal fire poker from next to the wood stove and knock Randy out on the floor. While my cousin slept upstairs, my mother held a pillow over her brother-in-law's face while I strangled him. It was quiet, it was easy, it was without remorse. After years of existing in our home as a silent witness, we crept upstairs to take out my cousin, too. There were to be no witnesses and no more memories. Mom and I both learned that the hardest part about killing someone isn't the act itself. It's not getting caught after the fact. I spoke up again, providing Steve with the explanation I knew he needed. I wasn't going to let this perfect solution slip through my fingers after all we had been through. I was just wondering if maybe I could keep him here. I don't know much about God, but I know I can't just throw family in the ground like everyone else and just, forget about him. I thought back to my mom tossing my cousin into the sandy abyss under our house, his body sucked underground into the swamp. I never buried him. I've got his remains in my truck right now. I just can't bear to part with him. The darkness of the room protected my lies, and they rolled off my tongue with ease. Steve sighed next to me. Sounds like you're carrying a heavy burden there, son. A burden of love. I thought about the night my uncle threw a beer bottle at my mom's head. I loved him so much, you had no idea. My own voice was a stranger. You said you've got him in your truck right now? Steve looked skeptical. Yeah, the bed, in a bag. It's weird, I know. My eyes focused on the picture frame of an old woman named Edith. In her picture, she held the lead rope of a big brown horse. They looked the same. I glanced up at Steve again, his sweat glistening in the wavering flames of the candles. I knew I needed to explain myself more if I was going to pull this off. Hey, Steve? My uncle. He was a complicated man. I looked away from Steve's eyes. No one knows you're lying if they can't see your eyes. I recalled Steve speaking about cemetery burials with disdain and ran with it. I just couldn't find it in me to put him in an expensive wooden box to stay underground forever. Great fucking tribute, huh? No way, man. Not my family. I wasn't raised by no good Samaritans, but I know what it means to respect family. I finished my spiel and eyed Steve, his head cocked slightly as if deep in thought. I'll tell you what, son. If you can carry him in yourself, I'll get a few boxes from the shed out back. Maybe something will work, depending on his size. One requirement, though. Steve squatted and picked up a candle, then looked me in the eye again. You come around here once a week. You can sit in on our service or not. You don't have to talk to no one if you don't want to. I think just spending time in a place of God is good for a young man. Don't you agree? Absolutely. Yes. Good answer. You head on out and bring him in here, then. Steve opened the door and immediately shut it behind him before shuffling down an adjacent hallway. He left me by myself. I shivered, unsure if it was from the air conditioning of a horde of human remains. I left the room and found my way out of the bizarre church. My body readjusted to the heat and sunlight as I walked towards my truck. The bag containing my uncle lay on its side in the bed. I wrapped the heavy plastic around my hands and heaved Uncle Randy over my back. Much lighter than I was expecting, he must have lost a lot more body mass as he succumbed to the rot of the summer. I was about to walk back in before I saw Steve heading my way with a wheelbarrow full of boxes. Even from afar, I could tell they were composed of that same cheap altar wood I'd seen earlier. Here we are. Changed my mind about you carrying your uncle inside. Let's do this exchange out here in case things get a little messy, yeah? Steve grunted and dragged his hand once again across his dripping forehead, effectively spreading the sweat across his already glistening face. I nodded and set my uncle on the gravel. I think I'm going to keep him in the plastic bag if that isn't too impersonal, I said as I lifted the bag into the biggest box Steve had brought me. Also, he's still a little ripe. I hope that's okay. I stared down at the bag. No problems at all, son. He's your kin. As long as your actions are driven by the good Lord, you can do no wrong. I bit my tongue, the pain distracting me from the absurdity of the situation. Once the body was in the box, Steve steered the wheelbarrow through the church's maze and into the back room. You got a pen and paper, mister? I heaved the box out of the wheelbarrow and carried my uncle to the farthest corner of the room. It was unoccupied, and I liked that. The fewer people looking at it, the better. Steve left and returned with a dingy papermate and a piece of notebook paper with the jagged, ripped edges still carelessly attached. I'll come back later and paint his name on that box all fancy, but for now this'll do, I told Steve. I wrote down a false name with sticky, sweet lines conveying every emotion I never felt for my uncle. Before placing it on top of the box, I asked Steve to recommend a Bible verse for good measure. He lit a candle, closed his eyes once more, and recited a verse slowly so that I could copy it down. Corinthians comes to mind. How about this one? Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of all mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction, with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. I think your uncle will be mighty proud of this tribute, son. God has a big, toothy smile for those who care so much about others, Steve said. Here's that candle. You set that on down next to your old uncle. Careful to keep it away from that piece of paper, though. Last thing we need in here is a fire. I felt the flame's heat shrinking my pores as Steve passed the candle my way. Steve walked me out, slapping me on the back a few times. The unbearable warmth of his beefy hands seeped through my t-shirt. You come around, you hear? Don't just stop on by to visit with your uncle. You gotta visit with God, too. I know earlier I said you don't have to talk to no one, but you gotta talk to God. Steve rested an arm on my truck's bed, now freed of its rotting passenger. Yes, sir. I will, sir. I opened the driver's side door and climbed up into my truck. Steve nodded at me, turned, and then strode back into the church. For a big man, he moved remarkably quickly. As soon as he got inside, I started up my truck and left the House of David behind. I felt like I needed a cold shower to scrub off the church's weird energy. As I pulled out, the decrepit House of David sign appeared even worse in my rearview mirror. I pushed my tape back into the cassette deck and resumed my drive to the diner. Once again, I was on my way to breakfast with my mother. I had spent days scouring farm fields and abandoned barns for my uncle's final resting place. I didn't believe in God, but maybe he did exist, and maybe he put the House of David right there for me to find. As I drove, I glanced at the trees planted next to the ditches, absorbing their equilibrium. I turned the dial on my radio all the way to the right and closed my eyes for just a moment, just long enough to remind myself who I was. The budding wheat stems danced to the guitar spilling from the open windows of my truck. I sped faster and faster past it all. Thank you.
Hi everyone! I want to give just a quick general thank you for tuning into my virtual BFA reading tonight. Despite the terrible, awful circumstances that brought us here, I am so thankful that I don't have to do this reading in person, and now I'm actually really excited to do my Prout reading. I'm going to be reading some poems to you guys from my thesis that is titled Water Damage. I have a lot of pieces that focus on abuse and water and religion and womanhood, and I'm really excited to share these with you guys. I have a pretty interesting mix in the sense that I have poems that I wrote my first semester here at BG, and then I have poems that I've written this same calendar week. So a lot of different pieces of work to showcase different points in my progress as a writer, and I'm really excited to share those with you guys. And I'm going to start with the poem Winter. I found icicles on the kitchen ceiling at the same time they discovered my mother's body. My father sat rotting in his chair. Fingers picked at wood until shredded and bloody. Hair fell down past his shoulders and in clumps on the floor. Church bells started ringing 3 minutes early and rang and rang and rang until we begged. Salted waves pulled us into the tides that threatened to clear us out. We coated ourselves in broken stones, shattered bricks, until our bodies were too inconvenient to carry. Violent tides. Keep the violent tides as a souvenir beneath your quivering tongue. Bite down on iron and resin. Do not scream to the sun about your tortured soul, coated in rotten runes, too sour to solve. Will the evil rise out of my veins, into my mouth, and bubble behind stitched lips? Or will I be left to slit my own throat and hope God can tell the difference between love and a lifeline? This one's called Rip Out the Stitches. Forgive me, Father. I don't know where to start. I don't know where you want me to start. But I'm here, and I'm trying, and I'm sorry. I don't remember much of last night. Maybe I had too much to drink. I remember there was a lump in my throat. I remember being scared to speak. I remember all the windows were shut, and the air was stiff, and the game was on. My husband watched. He grunted when his team dropped the ball. He hated losing, the same way he hated cleaning. He hated calling when he was late. He hated keeping the lights on when we forgive me, Father, I'm getting off track. When I get nervous, my hands start to shake. My mother says I should knit. Last night, I was attempting a scarf on the couch next to my husband. During the commercials, he would put his hand on my thigh. I couldn't help but think how easy to pierce the soft spots between the bones, the soft spots in his cheeks, the soft spots under the eyes, the soft spots where he prays, forgive me, Father, you don't need to hear this, but I need you to hear this. I need someone to hear me. My hands were shaking when I washed them off in the sink. I scrubbed until the water turned red, but the color didn't fade. It matched the blood spilling out from the face on the floor. He's sleeping, I told myself. My hands shaking again. Shaking. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe he's slipped. Maybe he's asleep. He's definitely asleep. Forgive me, Father. I didn't mean to waste your time. He's just asleep. I need to go wake my husband. Delusions of grandeur. I was blinded by the shadows cast onto me by shivering trees. There was no light to guide the way, only a faded map carved into the backs of my eyelids. I passed a rotting wooden sign from God, only one arrow pointing to the dim North Star. Did God forget the devil came down to Georgia and forked every road on her way in, or was he too distracted by his own creation? The peach blossom roots tripped my ankles until I bled, a blood trail, something to lead me back home where windows are boarded up with shields and I can't hear the wind howling my name. But I don't turn around, because what if something beyond the forest is more exciting than solitude? This next one is Inscription Hymns. This is the warning you won't find at the end of a prayer or in the bottom of your shivering glass. Once you have finished swallowing the tides. Preserve the fire first, before the warmth that comes with it. Wrap yourself in a blanket of 1,000 glowing stars before they burn you out. Crush the pocket watch noose before the gold chain slithers around your neck and expels the cries from your own throat. You do not need to be wary of the night once you realize the dark has more reason to be fearful of you. Nervous death. The call never comes when you're expecting it to. It's always inconvenient. Before long, the panic sets in like a smog filling your lungs. Sometimes I shake, but I don't let them notice that I'm the one who's nervous. I hate to see a pre-decayed body, gray and dull, a carcass of a person who doesn't match their memories anymore. They need help. They need support. Needs. What do I know about needs? I know they don't need me. They want a hooded figure to wear the mask. Something easy to fear, easier to hate. By the time they see me, they're already crying. Hysterical, blood-curdling sobs. Don't they know I'm scared too? I offer my hand, but they find no solace in my skeletal grasp. Silence. In a moment, I am alone again, their entire life fitting nicely in the shadows of my robes. I need to hurry. It's already time for my next call. Lady in Blue. I found a woman drowning in me, in the deepest parts where God can't hear you cry. She deemed herself a phoenix, scraping the seafloor for scraps of ashes already washed away. Her pleas weren't lost on me, but screeching tides only softened my advice for the damned. Do not fall back. Do not hold your breath. Do not beg for forgiveness. When there is no time left, we finally kiss until her lungs are filled with salt water and her eyes match the sand. All my sins remembered. I awoke to an empty body, sunken into satin sheets beneath moonlight and disaster. One paper-thin string of hope to keep me from rotting. They built a church out of bone and brick, 6.5 feet beneath the cemetery. I begged to be buried there, but I found my mother underground instead. I tell myself, if I keep coming back to pray, they'll make me a saint. I cannot see out of stained glass windows pressed from flesh and dirt, blood and sand, every part of you that kept falling out of the walls. How can I pray when I shatter my knees at the pew? The priest looks at me, but I only see my mother's eyes reflecting in communion wine. Lighthouse. It gets hard to separate right and wrong when everything is covered in a different shade of black. I cannot tell the difference between the shadows of bending bark and sailors that got too close to the edge. Are they all bowing in prayer, or did the bow finally break their necks? I offer a truce, a light, but those caught up in the storm don't remember how to leave. I am not a way out, only a reminder not to steer too close to the shore. Water Hymnal. I was 3 days sober when they found my baby huddled under saltwater blankets and molten sand. I pressed my lips across her shins and collapsed chest. Small shells and slick stones weighted against fragile enamel. Her arms outstretched, bound with fishing wire and chipped paint under her nails. I opened my mouth to scream, but only wedding rings came out. Dozens and dozens I gagged up onto the bubbling shore. My throat started swelling with prayers I couldn't remember. The water was just an idea I thought of on a whim. Heaven and hell only words hidden in storybooks. The tides whispered drink, and I didn't hesitate to consume them entirely. My body overflowed into rushing waves without fear. Drowning felt like coming home. Lake Erie in flood. At the northernmost tip of town, there is a fountain that is home to baptisms and rebirths. A bald man sits in an Adirondack chair while he smokes a cigar and looks for his wife in the Whitecaps. Waves swell over the docks, consuming them in their wrath and cleansing tear-stained church steps. In 1816, they founded a city built on water, and water it became. This next one is Community Burn. 12:11 a.m. The first officer arrives on the scene. A small fire flickering in the shop window grows until the flames lick at the garage door, and soon enough they've swallowed up the whole building. There is panic in the silence surrounding a midnight tragedy. Squad cars block off the street and stop traffic. The few vehicles on the road are forced to stall and watch the destruction. 12:28 a.m. A mother living behind the auto shop starts screaming when she can't find her daughter. The firemen pay her no mind. They were only called for the fire. Her desperation is undeniable in her sobs as she runs into the road. She looks to the stopped cars for help. They all turn their music up a little bit louder. 2:37 a.m. The sky is completely black. There are no stars to lighten the mood. The smoke billowing out from the building is reflecting orange from the streetlights. The amber glow cloud can be seen for miles. Families find solace in the safety of their own unburned homes. The mother, sat hunched over on the sidewalk, has gone hoarse from wailing. She still cannot find her daughter. 4:49 a.m. All that remains of the store are ash and dust. The charred hubcap lays beneath the rubble. The metal is still trying to gleam underneath the layer of soot, but it is tired. Everything is tired. The earth below the store is weak. The walls are sick of burning. The mother is worn from crying out to nobody. If anyone were to look under the hubcap, they would find the remnants of a pink shoe. But we could only handle one devastation at a time. Framed. I hold a broken family within my gold-dusted arms and shattered glass. Cobwebs cast shadows that dull the saturation of developing bruises. It's hard to remember the differences between shrieking and lightning, storms of thunder and blood-red lust entering a metamorphosis of eruption. It starts in the throat and dies out once I find myself amongst the rubble of other altered memories, destroyed. There is only silence in the dark, demolished drywall. A new reminder of destruction. A new excuse to hang up another picture. Excuse me. This next one is Ardreita's Bracelet. It hangs off a hook by my bed, golden. During sunsets, it reflects gleams across the walls. Its chains are small, thin, delicate, breaking, doomed to fall apart in a man's hands. Years ago, it smelled like her perfume. Now all I can breathe in, when I hold it against my lips in prayer, is sweat-eroded metal. Her name engraved on a band too difficult to read, too difficult to pronounce without tears threatening to spill over. Without her there to wipe them away, what's the point? I just don't talk about her anymore. The last time it touched her skin was the morning of the funeral. Mourners and grief-stricken family members grazed their fingertips against the chains as they passed by, pausing at the end of the casket to make the sign of the cross. At the end of the service, I unhooked the bracelet from her lifeless wrist, sliding it into my skirt pocket before the morticians took her away to burn her into ash. I wore it every day until a boy tried to blur the lines between yes and no and snatched it off me instead. I don't wear it anymore, but I want to. I don't pray for her anymore, but I want to. Gross, getting emotional. Cry, wolf, into the blood moon sky. Don't let your shaking breath scare you into silence. Amplify the shrieks with your trembling jaw, ripped open, your molars reflecting the stars. Let your tongue crack against the wind like a whip into heaven. You do not need to ask God for permission. Stop. Now inhale. The dust is calm again. Walk home with your tail between your legs. This next one is actually, I feel like I need to give a little bit of a preface to it, is about an actual painting. It's called Christ as the Man of Sorrows by a Dutch painter named Quentin Mastus, and it's just a painting of Jesus crying, but if you wanted to look it up and see the painting that I'm referencing while I'm reading this poem, you can go ahead and do that. But this poem is called Even the Golden Boy is Allowed to Cry. Tears fall on punctured skin, downturned eyes and a puckered mouth. Does he have to pray for his father's love, or does he beg like the rest of us? Will he drop to his knees in submission to spit out a recycled prayer, Christ, the man of sorrows, the man of defeat, the man of hopelessness. For a second, the painting transforms into the mirror. I cannot tell the difference between myself and the weeping Messiah. But he doesn't look back, so I move on. This next one is called Another Poem About God, and this is actually the poem I was talking about when I said my first poem at BG. This is literally my first poem at BG. Another poem about God. Was God there that night, standing in the shadows as my mouth dripped red, blood mixed with ash, your hand grasping my shoulder tight, immobile? You wiped the tear from my cheek before your friends saw. Did God hear me praying? Did he notice at all? I think I blacked out for a second, or maybe my eyes were shut in prayer. Now, is that what that was? A one-way conversation with God? Because in all my years crouched at the foot of crucifixion, I never got an answer. Did he care? Or did he just lose interest? I can't really blame him. In a world where men so easily break their own backs to cover that of another, why should God be any different? He made them in his image. And then the last poem is called Origin Story. I was born inside the mouth of a red leather dog fight, under melting street lamp shadows and God waiting for his turn to swing. Find the rock too important to be ruined with a name. Bottle up your beliefs and wash them down your throat with ease. Bite the hand that feeds you. Bruise the body, tough flesh and blue lips that kiss mud and dirt and whatever else festers beneath caskets in winter. Hot passion, cool hate, small fevers that feel like love, too soft to stop the bleeding. Hold entire lifetimes up to the sun. The clouds will break in memory of you. It all ended with a big bang. And that's the ending. I want to thank y'all again for tuning into this virtual Prout experience, and I hope you have a good night.